How's it going, guys? Valder here, and I am playing some more DCS. This time I am in the F-16. It's been a while, hasn't it, since I've actually made a DCS video, and it's been a while since this module came out. And it's one of these modules that is kinda divisive. And what I mean by that is that it came out and it was under development during a time when the F-18 wasn't completed. Not only that, but this plane in of itself was released in an unfinished state. It's still unfinished to this day. Now, whether you're okay with early access or not is really based on opinion. With that said, I want to focus on the aircraft itself. The first thing I want to bring up is that this plane has an insane power-to-weight ratio. As you can no doubt tell, plane takes off, gear goes up, and then just from afterburner thrust, take a look and see what this thing can do.
Altitude. Pull up. Altitude.
With other fighter jets, such as the MiG-29, I don't think that's something I could pull off. The power-to-weight ratio on this thing is ridiculous, and surprisingly, it is really good at turning. Normally, I think that Russian aircraft would be better at turning, but this thing is very capable in terms of being able to create a circle in the shortest amount of time possible. It also goes incredibly fast. If there is one thing I do want to point out, though, is that the F-16 does have a bit of a tendency to nose down when you're turning. That's no big deal. I mean, every airplane does that. It's just that this one seems a little bit more defined in that way. Either way, this is an incredibly easy to control aircraft. It is not clunky like the F-15, nor is it really ridiculously unstable like the SU-27. This plane will basically do what you tell it to do. And there are many reasons why this would be. For one, as I mentioned before, there is this insane power-to-weight ratio. The other one is that this is one of the jets that came out with fly-by-wire technology. It is incredibly good when it comes to handling. It will do whatever you want it to do. It almost feels like a video game, and I don't know if that's because it's early access or how this is what the plane is supposed to be like. I don't know. I honestly don't know. But it's very easy to control, even at high speeds. It's very quick to angle. It is an all-around good plane. So, what else could I say about the F-16? F-16 started flying in 1974 and was quickly adopted by the United States and Israel. It actually first saw combat with Israel. However, its most famous operation probably had to be Desert Storm, where this plane pretty much kicked ass. I mean, this is one of those planes that absolutely annihilated the Iraqi Air Force. And its combat record shows it has a ton of air-to-air kills, and only one air-to-air loss. Well, two, if you want to go off of India's testimony, but the way that I see it, no body, no casualty. But it is actually pretty good. It is a multi-role fighter. It is designed to be multi-role. It wasn't the original design purpose for this. However, it became a multi-role fighter, especially when the need for such a thing occurred. It's able to carry a pretty decent payload of bombs, certainly not enough to have an offensive war, but definitely enough to halt the battlefield and to destroy several tanks that are closing in on your town. But while I run the risk of sounding like a broken record, let me state that as much as I want to kiss this plane's ass, it isn't the best plane in the world, that's for sure. It's a really good middle ground aircraft. It doesn't have the air-to-ground capabilities of the A-10. It has tremendous air-to-air capabilities, though it doesn't really compare to the F-15. It is really good at turning, especially compared to the F-15, but it isn't the best turn fighter out there. The Salt Mirage might actually be a better turn fighter, and strangely enough, if we're talking about real life, that is the case. But as you can tell, high speeds, turning, cornering, there is no issue. Feels almost very simple to fly as I'm flying through these canyons. Though, however, I do kind of want to address the elephant in the room, and that has to do with early access. Now, is early access in of itself a bad thing? Some people think it is, some people think it's not. If you want my opinion, I don't necessarily mind early access. I could go so far as to say, maybe this plane is one of the export models, or some lame excuse like that. We can be a little bit creative when it comes to that, but needless to say, it is incomplete and it's not in a finished state. Does it mean it's bad? No, not in the slightest. However, I do not think it is worth $80. I think if you want to do early access, that's perfectly fine, but you shouldn't be charging people based off of promises, because that's exactly what Eagle Dynamics is doing. They charged us for a promise with the F-18, they're charging us for a promise of the F-16. This is kind of the same thing that a lot of these companies do. Razbam's pretty infamous about that. And I understand, it is a competitive business, but I'm just saying, it's not really an $80 product, in my opinion. Is it a bad module? Not in the slightest. While I'm recording this, I have had a blast. It is ridiculously good. And I guess I am sounding like a broken record. Very easy to control, ridiculous power to rate ratio. It wants to be in the air. I never had any issues with this plane trying to control it, or even trying to land it, or trying to get it into a turn fight. It all works wonderfully. But as I approach the mountains, as I do what I always do, I'm going to scale the mountains. However, you'll notice that I am running off of mill power. In fact, I'm not even running off of mill power. It's not 100%. I don't have an afterburner. But this power to weight ratio is so ridiculous that it simply doesn't matter. I haven't even had my hand on the throttle up until this point, where eventually I had to, throttle down. But even then, it still had it perfectly. Even when you get dangerously close to stall speeds, it doesn't become as unstable as you think it might be. Well, I did my loop-de-loop and it started to stall. All I needed to do was add a little bit of a rudder correction and it handled itself. It's a very capable fighter in that regard. But enough about that. Let's go ahead and discuss the landing. Landing this plane is surprisingly easy. Is it the easiest plane to land? It might actually be, but that doesn't mean that there aren't some things to take into consideration. One of them is how much thrust you have. You need to pretty much be running little to no power on the engines while you are landing. The other thing is that flaps for the most part are automatic, which to me is not a bad thing. Apparently this plane is good at knowing when the flaps need to be deployed, when they don't, when this plane is maneuvering, and when this plane is coming into land. It is pretty hands-off in a way. It's very automated, and that's not really a complaint coming from me. As you can tell, my airspeed is a little bit quick. That's to be expected because of how much thrust this thing actually has. you are pretty much an engine with wings. Not too different from the MiG-21, if you ask me. The only difference is that you have a lot more lift, so you don't need as much speed. The problem is that it's kind of hard to get your speed down. But coming into land, I haven't had any issues. As you can see, I am landing pretty well, going at a pretty good descent rate over the town, and things look good. As I get closer to the ground, I try to make sure that the tiny aircraft is pointed towards the end of a runway. You'll actually notice that putting the throttle to idle will make it drop dramatically, while increasing the throttle will bring your speed up. It is a very dangerous balancing act, in a way. But if you can manage it, it's not the hardest type of plane to land. That honor would probably have to go to the MiG-21, because holy crap, that plane is difficult to land. I finally figured out how to land that thing, but let's just say it took a long time, years. For me, this is about my second, maybe third time landing this, and I haven't had any issues. It's coming down very nicely, a little bit low to the glide slope just because of how a little thrust I'm putting into it, so I'd be adding a little bit of thrust here to even it out, and then of course to put it to idle. Kind of a shallow landing, but look at that.
Altitude.
Or as Air Force Proud likes to call it, buttering the bread. So, is there anything else I could say about this plane? Well, not so much in this segment, but I do have to get into the combat. Now, when it comes to dogfighting, this is one of my favorite things about this plane. It is also one of the most annoying things about this plane, which I'll get to later. Notice how I've been switching between guns and active radar missiles, the AIM-120s. I'll get to that in a little bit, but for now, let's focus on this dogfight. As you can tell, this dogfight isn't so hard for me. Mind you, this is an Su-27, and I'm able to keep up with it. Though, of course, as you can imagine, they certainly have a better turning radius than the F-16, that's for sure. But now it is time for me to bring this up. It is not programmed in yet in order for me to switch weapons. Apparently, it's in such early access that it isn't an option just yet. So, major nitpick there, if I do say so myself. I've been trying to figure out, it's like, oh, hey, maybe I just need to add a button to one of the dogfighting modes. That'll get things working. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. So, with what I'm left with is the necessity to use guns, which is something that I'm fine with. I'd much rather use missiles because I'm not the best gunfighter, but it's not going to cost me this fight, to say the least. So, as you can tell, I am fighting tooth and nail to turn with this plane, and I'm actually able to keep up. Knowing that these planes are pretty good when it comes to air-to-air, when it comes to dogfighting, when it comes to turning, it can be really difficult. But if you're able to turn at a steady speed, you will start to outturn them. That is one of the crazy things that I noticed. So, as we're coming up with this bandit, just keep that in mind. I could have easily blown this thing out of the sky if I had air-to-air missiles that could actually switch back. This is a big, glaring problem, Eagle Dynamics, something that I can't exactly tolerate. But it's something that should be completed upon upgrades, or updates, I should say. Hint, hint. But yeah, so far, as you can tell, it is susceptible to running out of energy. That's just what you get with aircraft in a turn fight. Fighting against a Russian fighter jet in a turn fight can be pretty daunting, as you could imagine. Here I am trying to figure out, it's like, oh, how do I do this? Unfortunately, I couldn't figure that one out. But moving on. There's no problem with just going with a gun's kill.
Altitude. Altitude.
And there we go, perfectly executed.
Altitude.
So here it is, the F-16. I absolutely love this module. I really, really wish that they could upgrade it, but I can't say that I'm not having fun. But hey, that said, hope you guys enjoyed. I'm looking forward to having more videos on the F-16 soon enough. But with that said, you guys have a good one.